Hey, everybody, welcome. As people are filtering in, we will get started in just a minute. Welcome to the third day of the 2020 Global Order Colloquium at Perry Worldhouse, the University of Pennsylvania's Global Public Policy Hub on the UN at 75, Coronavirus and Competition. I'm Michael Horowitz, Richard Perry Professor and Director of Perry Worldhouse, and I hope everyone is safe and healthy during these unprecedented times. Thank you all so much for being here today. I'll do my formal introduction in a moment, but before I begin, a few logistical notes. One, following the conversation between Dr. Brundtland and Deb Amos, we will open the discussion up to questions that have been received from the audience. Two, to ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom interface in the middle. Three, you'll also see a chat button. Please save the chat area for technical or logistical issues. We'll also drop resources there during the event and at its close as well. Finally, please keep things clean and safe for work in the chat and the Q&A, which will help us have a successful event. This colloquium is made possible in part by the generous support of Carnegie Corporation of New York, the Elliott and Harriet Goldstein Private Foundation and Jesse Friedlander, and Paritosh V. Thakur and Hamal Marani. I'd also like to add a special thanks to the Elders, an international NGO of distinguished global leaders, for their assistance in making today's events happen. We're honored to have several distinguished speakers with us today and to introduce the event. It's my honor to introduce Penn's Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, Zeke Emanuel. He's not only Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, he's Chair of the Department of Medical Ethics and Health Policy at the University of Pennsylvania. From 2009 to 2011, he served as Special Advisor for Health Policy to the Director of the White House Office of Management and Budget. He received his MD from Harvard Medical School. He's written and edited 9 books and over 200 scientific articles. He's a globally known authority on issues surrounding public health and COVID-19, and we're honored to have him here today to introduce our keynote conversation. Thank you very much for being with us here today, Zeke.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for inviting me. In these tremendously unprecedented times, haven't been repeated in a century, we are meeting virtually, which is possible and probably has never been possible before this decade. And we are meeting on one of the most important issues I can imagine, thinking about the world order, how COVID is affecting it, how the competition among countries and the collaboration among countries is going to be altered by the current moment, not just COVID, but climate change and many other challenges. It's hard to think of two better people to help us think through these complex issues. I have the great honor now of introducing Dr. Gro Brundtland, someone who really does need no introduction. She's a physician and for many years, beginning in 1981, I actually was astounded when seeing that again. She was Prime Minister of Norway continuously through 1996. Pretty amazing period of time and really Norway's resurgence as a leading country, especially in matters global. She then became, for 5 or 6 years, the Director General of the World Health Organization and served incredibly ably at that period of time. She also, as Mike just mentioned, became a member of the Elders, a group that was put together by Nelson Mandela of wise people to help address global issues, advise global leaders. She's also served as chairing the World Commission on Environment and Development and the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, which was formed in 2018 to look at preparedness for things like this very issue. Again, I can think of almost no one in the world with more experience as a country leader, heading up an international organization and giving advice to many international leaders than Dr. Gro Brundtland. So we look forward very much to your comments. We're also extremely lucky to have Professor Deborah Amos. Most of you will know her as a phenomenal NPR reporter for the Middle East. She has been both a radio reporter, but also for many years on TV at ABC News and PBS and many other countries, many other companies. She has a long list of awards. My favorite, of course, is the Edward R. Murrow Award, probably the highest award you can get in journalism and media. She also got the Alfred I. DuPont Award from Columbia University for coverage of Iraq. She's been a visiting fellow at Harvard twice, first in journalism as a Nieman Fellow, and then subsequently at the Shorenstein Center at the Kennedy School of Government. Someone who knows a lot about geopolitics, about war, and about how countries relate to each other in volatile regions of the world. So with those two introductions, it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Brundtland and Professor Amos.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dear Zeke and everyone else listening today, I'm pleased to be speaking at this year's Global Order Colloquium and grateful to Perry World House and the University of Pennsylvania for inviting me here today. We are meeting in troubled and turbulent times. COVID-19 has killed 1 million people worldwide, including more than 210,000 victims in the United States alone. The fact that the President of the United States himself has succumbed to the virus is a stark reminder of the risk the pandemic poses to all of us, regardless of power or privilege. But we should not forget that even though high-profile cases like President Trump, President Bolsonaro in Brazil, and Prime Minister Johnson in the United Kingdom command understandably large amounts of media attention, both the death toll and the economic impact of the pandemic has fallen disproportionately on poor, vulnerable, and marginalized communities within all societies, deepening the chasms of inequality and social injustice. COVID-19 has revealed a collective failure by leaders and policymakers to take pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response seriously and prioritize it accordingly. It has demonstrated the fragility of highly interconnected economies and social systems and the fragility of trust. It has exploited and exacerbated the fissures within societies and among nations. It has exploited inequalities, reminding us in no uncertain terms that there is no health security without social security. COVID-19 has taken advantage of a world in disorder. There are political leaders who have scorned notions of international cooperation and solidarity, and even sought to undermine universal values such as justice, the rule of law, and basic truth. In preparing for this address, I was reminded of the words of the founder of the state of Pennsylvania, William Penn, which were written over 3 centuries ago, but still resonate today. And I quote, "In all debates, let truth be thy aim, not victory, or an unjust interest, end of quote. Today, it is abundantly clear that the only way to rebuild from COVID-19 and prevent future crises is through solidarity, honesty, transparency, and good faith. In 1945, after the horrors of the Second World War and the Holocaust, leaders vowed that never again would such a human-made catastrophe be allowed to befall the world. They founded the United Nations and endorsed its charter, which proclaims faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women, and of nations large and small. The post-war multilateral system, underpinned by the United Nations, has, for all its imperfections, decisively promoted health, security, and prosperity over the past 75 years. It is therefore imperative that we do everything in our power to defend and to uphold the importance of global multilateral cooperation for the sake of our common future and our security. It is particularly disturbing that we have been confronted with this global pandemic at a time when the multilateral system was already under an unprecedented state of attack, unfortunately led in particular by the United States. The barrage of assaults orchestrated by the Trump administration since 2017 against a wide range of multilateral institutions and agreements, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Agreement, the deal on Iran's nuclear program, and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, to name just some of the most prominent examples, has done serious damage to the international system. The most paradoxical example remains, of course, the US withdrawal from the World Health Organization itself, the main institution to uphold global coordination and cooperation in health. All these actions have made it even more difficult to achieve the global consensus we need to tackle COVID-19 and also other global threats to humanity. Unquestionably, the United States has not been the only bad actor in undermining multilateralism. China also bears responsibility for the unhelpful public infighting over the origins of the virus in recent months, which has contributed to paralyzing the UN Security Council and undermining the work of the WHO. Now, the broader geopolitical divisions and strategic rivalries between the United States, Russia, China, and other powers are likely to persist in the years ahead, and multilateralism will continue to be undermined so long as key global leaders treat international relations primarily as a zero-sum game of winners and losers. Global leaders who have now seen the devastation caused by a global plague must instead use the UN's 75th anniversary as a crucial opportunity to revive multilateral cooperation. This is also the only way to effectively tackle the key global challenges that we all face, particularly the serious existential threats posed by climate change and by nuclear weapons. Global economic coordination will also be critical for ensuring a rapid and sustainable recovery from the pandemic. Again, our global institutions, such as the World Bank and the IMF, have illustrated their present limitations with regard to quick and effective countermeasures in such a dramatic crisis affecting all of us across the world. So what is needed now is a new Bretton Woods moment of innovation and creativity in the service of strengthening global governance. If we do not take the steps that are urgently needed in the years ahead, our planet is likely to become a significantly more dangerous and unstable place, and there is ultimately no automatic guarantee of long-term sustainable development and global security. But if global leaders do commit to sustain multilateral cooperation, there is no question that we have the capabilities to solve the collective challenges that we face and thereby ensure a safer and more prosperous future for humanity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brundtland. And I also am delighted to be here on the UN's 75th anniversary. I want to take up some of those themes. One of the lessons of COVID-19, as you point out, is we are all members of the herd, that we are all entangled. Poor, rich, doesn't really matter. The United States has put up $10 billion in development money for a vaccine. This is certainly an issue that is on all of our minds. There is an organization called COVAX, and the idea is to bring vaccines to the poor. The United States has not joined, neither has China. What are the consequences of the decisions of two superpowers when we have a global pandemic and a vaccine that may be limited?
You know, I was watching as gradually more and more countries signed up to COVAX. Late in the game, before the kind of final limit had been set, the UK was still lacking, but it did come in, you know, in time and finally. And I must say, I would have been even more fundamentally surprised, you know, if even the UK had not signed up to COVAX. But now we are, without the two major powers, US and China, in their internal conflict, from different perspectives, they have not signed up any of them. Of course, it undermines the whole effort. Although most countries have signed up, most countries across the world have understood the importance, supporting the initiative by the World Health Organization and a number of partners to do exactly what you said, to secure that we have a global effort to get the vaccine, which can be safe and useful, and then get it to every country across the world, first to critical personnel in critical functions. So, you know, this just illustrates the drama of what is happening when, first of all, I mean, the US that was there establishing the United Nations and being a leading country mostly all of these decades until these last few years. It is really, for me, a dramatic and terrible development that I really become, you know, sorry about and depressed about, although I will never leave my optimism behind. Maybe already in a few months, we will see both US and then China turning around.
So yesterday, the head of the Gates Foundation said that the $10 billion that the US spent is actually public good because they moved vaccine research faster than we've ever seen before. And I wondered if you agreed with that even though the United States is not part of the effort, the fact that we have vaccines actually gets us somewhere.
Yeah, you know, we have an institution called CEPI. It happens to be in Oslo, but this was created a few years ago exactly to prepare collaboration on development of vaccines for new and unidentified diseases like which we have now seen. So this has helped many countries also cooperate on vaccine development and prepare for this situation. But again, of course, the funding that has come from in the US for vaccine development is having an impact on the totality of our knowledge about potential vaccines, but also through CEPI and through WHO COVAX, many countries have contributed funding to vaccine development because many of the firms that are able to be in this competition will need some security that if they succeed, what they have produced will in fact be used and they can get back on their investment, you know, if they happen to be those among those that complete a good vaccination project and get through all the phases of clinical trials, etc.
One of the signs of the troubles, as you point out, of multilateralism, cooperation, global cooperation, is not only has the US pulled out of COVAX, but they've also pulled out of the WHO, and they are major funders. From a journalistic point of view, it seems that the pullout is for political reasons, but nevertheless, it will hurt the institution. You headed the WHO in 2003, and that was when the severe respiratory syndrome known as SARS emerged in China. You were able to say things to China. You were able, as reported at the time, to slam the Chinese. The rules changed in 2005, and it made it much more difficult for the WHO to appear to be neutral. Do you think that we really need to take a look at the rules of the WHO and strengthen that organization so a leader can call out a country and say, you are misbehaving?
Yes, indeed. You know, paradoxically, in a way, when the SARS happened in 2003 and 4, and I was leading the WHO, we had a limited international health regulations, but only addressing a few well-known old diseases. So during my time, we even had negotiations ongoing to create international health regulations in a much broader sense, to be able to require from countries that they report quickly and immediately when a public health threat is emerging or an outbreak like this is emerging, and a number of other duties for every country to be transparent, collaborative, and report to WHO. So, but I said paradoxical because I started wondering about the question you just asked about why could I speak out in 2004, no, in 2003, I mean, when China was not responding. They didn't let our representative in Beijing even enter the health ministry to ask questions. And they didn't take my telephones from Geneva. So to me, it was clear, of course I had to speak out. I knew through social media and reporting from experts in neighboring countries that something was happening and that we needed to find out and to get China to cooperate. So I had to speak out publicly because they didn't respond to our direct request. Now, so when I was watching in January that days and weeks moved forward while there was this discussion with China that WHO, also the Director General went to China, but weeks after the outbreak had already started. But China was not giving the full reality of what was in fact happening. There was a respiratory virus And it did spread among people, directly between people, not just from the animals to separate, individuals. So I then wonder, has the international health regulations, the committees that have been made to give expert advice to the Director General, indirectly undermined his voice, his ability to speak out based on the evidence he already has? Not waiting for expert committees who have representatives from different countries, even the two major ones. Yeah, I mean, I just ask the question, were there things there, even in the expert committee? Maybe there were pressures inside that because they couldn't agree on quite obvious things before WHO finally, at the end of January, gave the expression of a public health emergency of international concern. So it took too long time, and it shouldn't have to be like that. So we need to improve the international health regulations, strengthen the authority of the Director General, and strengthen the WHO itself. We are absolutely dependent on a strong WHO.
You know, there's a report coming out in 2021, and I was reading that both the German and the French health ministries are complaining that the way that the system works now is that the WHO is kept weak by design. And we're in the middle of a global pandemic that we haven't seen in a century. Can you reform the WHO? And you have been warning in all of your official hats, this is how life is going to go now. This is a pandemic. There'll be more because of global warming, because of all kinds of reasons. Can you make those reforms? And can you in particular make those reforms as we're going through this, or do we have to wait?
Well, I certainly cannot make reforms, but I can advocate. I can advocate and speak out about them. And I have been given a role as a co-chair of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, which was instituted by the WHO and the World Bank as an independent commission, a board, to monitor preparedness. This happened, we started 2 years ago. Our report last year told what could happen any day about a respiratory virus spreading, leading to a pandemic and undermining the world economy by 5%, etc. We had made that warning, 2 months before it started happening. Now in our first yearly report. Now, so, and we showed that the world was absolutely far from prepared. It was a dangerous situation. It still is, because that preparedness level is still what the world is dealing with. And then our ability to respond has also been lacking because the multilateral institutions don't have mandates to move quickly. They are waiting for the major countries, G7, G20, etc. And the system needs to be changed. So the question then is there the experience now that every leader across the world has had with COVID-19 going to lead to more awareness and more determination to make the necessary changes? That's what I hope will happen. And we will certainly tell why and continue arguing for it.
There's been a very strange phenomenon in this pandemic, and it's to lessen the effect of science. I read a quote from Daniela Meadows, who wrote The Limits to Growth in the 70s. And her sentence made so much sense to me. Evidence is not enough, she writes. Evidence is not enough. That you can't expect the government will react just because they know the facts. So we've seen it again and again. So what is the strategy when evidence is not enough?
Yeah, I think absolutely I agree with her, definitely. Because you have to be speaking out and explaining to people why that evidence counts and why it affects your life, your neighbor's life, your future, your children. You know, you have to have leaders that take it on board and share it with people in a trustworthy manner. Those leaders who have done that in this situation were also, you know, leaders of countries that made effectful countermeasures early on in this pandemic as well. But the other thing is, it is, you know, it's even worse than this, because I see that in the United States, there are activities put in place to undermine the institutions that the American democracy has made to have evidence base with regard to the environment, polluted water, polluted air, or health emergencies, public health, methodologies, vaccine development, etc. Trying to politically intervene against their own institutions that are put in place to give people, to give scientists, to give everyone transparently the knowledge base on which to have an opinion and on which for people to be secure. This to me is more shocking, but I have seen it before. In the US, I remember this happened in parts of the Bush administration. And it was shocking at that time, and now it has become much worse. Because in a way, it was pulled down during the Bush administration. I think he learned during his presidency, and he stopped doing it towards the end of his term. But now it is all over the place.
Should we be promoting, look, in my profession, I watch news conferences and I think, why don't you have your science people there? Why is it your political people are there? This is not a political question. It's a fact-based science question. We are just beginning to see in the media, scientists giving pretty much neutral pronouncements on what we're looking at. I mean, I do not have the authority to tell you the list of drugs that the president is taking and what effect they may have. And I shouldn't be on the air talking about it. That's what a science reporter does. Do you think that because populism has somehow devalued scientists and science, that there needs to be some strategy to bring these people to the media, to the fore, to give them more of a voice?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's essential. And by the way, the Norwegian government has every time had the leader of the public health institution, the public health together with the prime minister and the health minister when they give press conferences about the situation of COVID. And they have been able to answer more politically oriented questions and then, give the floor to the leaders of our institutions when the question is evidence-based and scientific basis for decisions. And so in my country, people are used to having access also to the evidence base in critical situations. It can be done.
It must be done.
Yeah.
Dr. Brundtland, I'm getting lots of questions for you, so let me go to some of them.
Yeah.
And here is a postdoc fellow, Michael Frankus. I'm inspired and agree with your call for a new Bretton Woods. Could you elaborate on what that might look like today, and how would it differ from those past calls?
I am avoiding making kind of the concrete conclusions about what it would look like, in the sense that, you can use the existing institutions, WHO, the World Bank, the IMF. But what you need is mandating and funding those institutions in such a way that multilateral cooperation can work, also in crisis situations like this one. The problem is that they don't have mechanisms that they can, they don't have them established in such a way that they can quickly secure funding even for critical measures in the area of global public goods. They are waiting for ODA countries, people who are, paying development aid, or certain donor countries who are nice to try to help the global public good. We need a commonality of interest across the world, responsibility for preparedness, for response in these critical areas. And we can't be waiting for G7 or G20 months before decisions are made. So the institutions can be changed internally, but you need the political, you need a political situation where also the major countries are willing to be part of a global collaboration, which is consistent and workable.
You would think that in a pandemic that would happen, but it has not.
No.
So if it hasn't happened in a pandemic, what is it that pushes people to understand that they have to?
The last pandemic of real size was the flu pandemic, the Spanish flu 100 years ago. So people across the world, leaders and policymakers across the world, NGOs, everyone, no one of us have had the experience that we have had with COVID-19. It has been even worse than what we warned about in our report from the GPMB last year. So there is a dramatic change of picture. So if leaders don't understand now what has been at stake and what is at stake looking to the future, I will be surprised. No present leader has had the experience that we now are going through. This is why I am still optimistic, thinking that change can and will happen.
Okay. Another question. What changes would you suggest the WHO and other institutions make to be better prepared to act quickly in the next pandemic?
It means that the international health regulations, they have to be looked through, revised, and strengthened. And every country has to comply with those regulations. They have to transparently share information at the moment that things are happening in their country. And also, the WHO must from now on have unfettered access to any country and to any part of any country. It is unbelievable that the WHO could not just go directly to Wuhan and discuss with local authorities there what was ongoing on behalf of the global community. They couldn't until China allowed them to. This is not something we can continue having. I mean, why would countries have to decide whether experts from WHO can help us check what's going on? Because it's a question for the whole world, not only for the country in question.
That is so logical that one would think there must be a groundswell. Is there? Do you see, for the first time ever, that there is such a consensus that this must happen, that you could see that happening by 21 or 22?
Well, the groundswell, I think, is starting to come. People are much more aware. And there are a number of leaders across the world, I think, who are prepared to make new commitments and to be part of a better solution for the future.
So I'm going to move a bit to development because we have a question about your work in that field. And Sabrina Arias asks, can you comment on the progress or lack of progress on sustainable development since the groundbreaking Brundtland report in 1987? Do you think the SDG will be effective to work towards the achievement of sustainable development?
I think it took quite a long time from '87 through a number of international conferences and commitments before finally in 2015, both the Sustainable Development Goals were decided upon in the General Assembly in New York in September of 2015, and then the climate agreement in Paris 3 months later. So that it means it took nearly a generation. However, I have often explained to people that when you imagine that there are 100, nearly 200 countries, and the whole agenda is a broad and large one, involving everything across the board, from energy to environment to political change, human rights. It covers everything. In fact, it's not strange that this couldn't happen overnight. So while I kept my optimism, while I was pushing for Sustainable Development Goals to be taken seriously over all these decades, I saw positive change all the time. And I believe that unless the world had come together across every country in already September 2015, we wouldn't have had the Paris Agreement either. Why? Because the big conflict between the developed and the developing world had been stopping an agreement on climate again and again, every time it was tried. Because the question was, the developed world has made this problem. The developing world, has no responsibility for what's happened. When Sustainable Development Goals were negotiated, gradually more and more countries entered. There was not only developing countries, it was both. Now, why was that important? Because now, when you sign up to the Sustainable Development Goals from the UK or from the US or from Norway, you are committing to overcome inequality, to respect human rights, to move towards a sustainable future, equally with developing countries. While before this change, this division in the world between the rich countries and the poor countries had stopped us from finding a place together. So unless the SDGs had been for everyone, we wouldn't have had the Paris Agreement applying to everyone. Doesn't apply in the same way, but it applies to everyone. And while all this has happened, China, that was a so-called developing countries, back in 1987, has moved upwards in economic strength and in more and more pollution. And they are now the biggest contributor to the climate problem in the world. So we are all in this together, again, not only with the pandemic, but also with regard to climate and sustainable development.
One of the results of the US pulling out of the Paris Peace Accords was turbocharging private initiatives, because people who were involved in this issue, felt, okay, I have to do this. And it goes to the next question that we have from Kenneth Scholnholz, and he asks about public-private partnerships. Do you see a role for multinational corporations and other private sector entities to establish and achieve goals related to sustainability and global warming?
Absolutely. We need everyone on board to promote sustainable development goals. Private sector, the NGO community, all of us, we have to create partnerships and from public and private, and in the informal sector, local, they need to also work with local communities where the solutions can be found. And so, yes, partnerships are absolutely essential for sustainable development and for solving the climate crisis. But we cannot leave to the private sector alone to set the standards and to decide what goals need to happen. So, progressive business leaders understand that they are dependent also on government regulation and government agreements in order to be able to move efficiently forward. But we need to work together, private and public sector.
Meaning there are some things that only government can do.
Yes, that's my point, because sometimes people go overboard saying, why don't we let the private sector take over the whole thing? No, then we will lack consistency, we will lack goal setting that is on a democratic base. It cannot be done only by the market, but the market is a great help if it is respecting necessary standards and regulations that apply to all.
You are the co-chair of the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. Every time I hear you speak, every interview I read with you, you are always talking about how the world is fundamentally changed by this coronavirus. A year from now, I'm assuming you will put out another report. And I think for all of us who are trying to think about what is it going to be like? You know, what is the new normal? What happens when we get to the other side of this peak experience of a pandemic? Do you have a sense of what the world looks like, and you know how long these kind of extreme measures have to be in place, and will we be living with corona for the rest of our lives?
Well, I think, realistically speaking, we will find solutions. I mean, hopefully and realistically, I think we will find a vaccine that works, that in collaboration can be used across the world within 21, I'm hoping, which means that when we enter 22, we may have come through the worst effect of the virus hitting communities across the world. Now, that doesn't mean we don't know after this if the new coronavirus here will disappear or will be part of a future number of different coronaviruses that are there around, but that we may have to vaccinate against, like we do with influenza. So in this, in my mind now, we have a kind of a 2-year scenario where we hopefully can get through the major implications that we are now seeing socially and economically by corona. But if we don't do it together, we are all in it together. If we are not able to do it together, non-vaccinated people can re-enter the infection. You know, we have to be able to work together to control that virus. By the vaccine and by the other, you know, necessary implementations when we don't have a vaccine.
Was there any part of you that watched what happened this week in Washington, where a 74-year-old male who is overweight was able to test positive, have monoclonal antibodies, some of the newer drugs, some old drugs, and get out of the hospital? You know, who knows what happens next? I know that disease takes odd courses, but the fact that he could walk out of that hospital 6 months after this begins, did it tell you that, oh, okay, wait a minute, there are some medical strategies ahead of the vaccine, there are some medical strategies that are looking pretty good?
You know, yes, it showed also the difference between having the chance to get the most potential and best types of actions taken to you because you are in a privileged situation. I mean, that is what really got home to me. And I know that the antibodies that the president was given have only been given to a few people in the US and just a few across the world. And it may show that that really can make a difference on a much broader scale. But I am not sure that there is activities there are activities really going on to be potentially making this available to a much broader public. I don't know, but I also know that there is another therapeutic that could have been made available more quickly, which I think hasn't been, which is antibodies taken from patients that have survived corona. They create antibodies, and there are a potential treatment that could be made available if it had been done in a large scale, that could be given to patients and share the immunity of former patients. So there are a number of things that we could have done which haven't been done.
So as we watch the vaccine rollout, and everybody is watching like a hawk, what you understand, or what I'm beginning to understand, is some will be more expensive than others, depending on the technology that's been used to develop them. Does that present an international problem? Are there going to be some vaccines that are simply not affordable for the developing world, and they have to wait a little longer because we are not we don't have a multinational cooperative agreement there? I mean, are you concerned that there's this price differential?
Well, yes, that is one concern. But at the moment, I am more enthused by the fact that there are already 30 different vaccine trials, which are in clinical trials. And there are 10 in what we call clinical trial phase 3, which really means we are approaching answers. And from that, those answers, which would come just in a few months, probably, we can compare different types of vaccines. Maybe we find a good and safe vaccine that is not among the most costly ones. I mean, that's what I'm hoping for, but there is a possibility that this can happen because there are so many vaccine trials already that have come far.
So we have about 6 minutes left. Let me take one more question from the audience. Understandably, many experts got the facts wrong early in this pandemic as they were learning more about COVID-19. As a doctor and politician, how does she think experts can better communicate in the future to create more trust, even as knowledge evolves in an uncertain environment? This is the nightmare of anyone who works in public health, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it is a problem to explain to people, this is what we know. This virus is new. We have these assumptions about how it will spread. But we don't know enough yet about how infective it is and how many will succumb to it. I mean, you as an expert, as long as you are delivering the evidence as far as you know it, my experience is that people understand. They don't expect an expert to know more than the expert has available in form of evidence. So when you do that, you share with the public what you know and what you don't know, and what you are looking closely into, trying to gather more evidence, then you keep the trust. People listen and they understand the limitations.
I fear I can see examples where that didn't work out. In the early days, the CDC, Tony Fauci here in America said, you don't need to wear masks. What they didn't say was, you don't need to wear masks because we're short and you can manage for a while longer. And so what the public heard was, you don't need to wear masks. And there was another thing they said, young people don't get this. That was the science at the time.
Yeah, but now, I agree with you. I mean, I am very admiring of Fauci, but he also has made some small mistakes on the way. And I think that it should have been said that, we don't have millions of masks at the moment. We have to use them in the medical services, in the hospitals, etc. And we are looking into how effective it can be in a more general use in the population. So we will come back to it. You know, they should have said this. Even in Norway, there was a tendency, and in WHO and in Norway, through our public health agency, they were saying that masks are not very effective. But you know, one reason why they said it was this. In some communities and countries, masks have been the answer when something is spreading, without realizing that the most important thing is distance, is social distancing. Washing your hands, because you take this infection by your hands, touching surfaces, etc. So, you know, in order to give priority, the mask is not number one priority. The mask is number 3 priority, which then, in a way, I think, led some public health experts to think, well, you know, it's not the major issue. The major issue is to explain to people that we must lock down parts of the society to get public distances, I mean, social distancing, and we need to teach people to clean their hands. So I think, you know, because we shouldn't either turn it around and make as if masks would have solved the problem.
No.
No. It does give additional protection, yes.
But I mean, public health messaging is tricky. So
It's tricky, yeah.
Don't worry, young people don't get it because the science said that. And then they did, but it's taken quite a while for the public to take on board. Yes, you can, I mean, 20-year-olds have died. But you can still see reckless behavior from young people because they didn't hear the update.
The other part, no. Yeah. Yes. Right. No, we shouldn't simplify everything. It is challenging, but that also means that we have to be working hard to build trust and to give the correct evidence as far as possible.
So, Dr. Brundtland, we have 1 minute left. I'm going to give it to you. You have called for $5 paid, you know, for every human. That's what preparedness is. Please tell us what we should do now, and then I'll come back and say goodbye.
Oh yeah, but you know what, we in the GPMB report just now in September, we made the comparison between the billions that need to be invested in preparedness and the several trillions that will be lost in the global economy if we don't make that investment. And that is the important lesson. And this is what gives me hope that those who decide on budgets and on systems for going forward will realize that simple calculation. We could spend 500 years with a $5 preparedness per person, and still, you know, to get to the losses to the world economy that are already happening in the trillions of dollars.
Dr. Brundtland, I thank you so much for this time. And now I'm going to turn it back to the organizers. You're brilliant. Thank you very much for all of your answers.
Very good to have this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brundtland, for those insights. And thank you, Deb, as always, for moderating an exceptional conversation, and to our audience for joining us here today. You know, these are such critical issues, and it's an honor to be able to host this discussion at Perry Worldhouse. And hopefully we can join in person at some point in the future. Links to register for our upcoming events are being dropped into the chat. Actually, our last Global Order Colloquium keynote, a high-level panel of global leaders, is kicking off in just 30 minutes. So we hope you can click on that link and continue the conversation. And if you want more information about Perry Worldhouse events, you can sign up for our mailing list or follow us on social media at Perry Worldhouse. Thanks again, everybody, for being with us here today, and hope to see you in just half an hour.